Hello, Ken Comfort again here for Tallgrass Economics. You recall on our last podcast, which I hope you had an opportunity to view, that Dr. David Kingsley started a first of a series regarding how the American healthcare business model is hurting you and me every day, with their priorities being out of alignment with where they need to be if their mission truly is care for people's health needs. Today, Dr. Kingsley is going to continue with that and explaining how this has turned into truly a monster. And then he's also going to talk to you more specifically about the specific economic impact on you and me as a consequence of what's going on here. So with that commentary, I'm going to invite Dr. Kingsley to join us at this point.
Good morning, Kent.
Hello, Dave. Good to see you again. And I'm quite excited about where you're going to go with us today on this topic. It's such a critical topic, and you're doing a tremendous service to the country for sharing your information about this from your extensive research. So go right ahead. What do you have for us today?
Well, Ken, I think it's you and I together that are doing this because your thoughts about this and your interviewing skills are helping us bring this to the fore, which is, what is a monster? Why do we call the healthcare system a monster? And I know people might think that's rather inflammatory, but I think we should talk about what we mean and translate monster into the world we live in today, which is predatory economics. What we did with healthcare in the United States is we know that private industry is not going to offer healthcare at a price that the average American can afford. So there would be a lot of people, I mean, not a lot, but probably 80% of our population without any access to medical care. So the government is, like other countries of the world, has to fund medicine or medical care, healthcare for its population. So what we decided to do in the free market craze of the 1980s on was say, well, if we privatize it, if we turn it over to corporations, we'll get a more efficient, more effective, and the cheapest possible product at the best price and the best service. Well, the opposite has happened. We privatized our medical care system, which has turned out to be a monster, because what we did was we turned corporations loose on the government. At the same time that we privatized medical care, we began to see dark money in politics, not only dark money, but money right out in the open for campaigns and so forth. So what we have now is a corporate domination of the healthcare system without enough government control and regulation. An example of that is you pay, I pay, we all pay, as we work about 3% of our wages and salaries throughout our working life into Medicare. So we pay for that. That covers the hospital Part A part. We also, when we decide we want Part B, which is the physician services, a lot of other things that aren't covered under the hospital part of Medicare, we pay a premium for that. I think it's now about 140, 50 bucks for Part B out of your pocket. That's a premium that you pay. So when I look at the total cost of Medicare, I look at their financials, what they pay is about $1 trillion. At this time, about 54% of that is totally paid by you, by anyone listening to this who's on Medicare. It comes out of your taxes, your premiums, your co-pays, and so forth. So the industry's been able then to get the other 46% paid by the government. Instead of being able to offer you what you've paid for at a reasonable price. I mean, you have paid enough for you to get good service. But that doesn't cover it, because we're now funneling so much money into the corporations through excessive drug prices, through excessive hospital charges, etc. So that's what we mean by the monster, because it's grabbing money from you that it really shouldn't be taking and giving you back less than you really need as a patient.
Exactly, Dave. Can you, I think anybody watching this knows on some level that what you just described is taking place. Would it be helpful in any way to connect the dots a little bit about how we got from where it wasn't thus to where it is now? Because let's face it, it is actually very efficient. If you are in the C-suite of one of these healthcare companies, or you are a shareholder, it's super efficient. If you're a citizen who is in need of the services, you and I both know some horror stories about situations that people have gone through when they trusted themselves to the care of one of these institutions, whether it be a hospital or a nursing home or a rehabilitation center, what have you, and were shocked at the circumstances and the situation that they were subjected to, and had no knowledge of it before they entered into that quagmire. They just didn't know. And so most Americans don't know unless they have a family member that becomes shall we say, a unwilling participant because of their circumstance. So how are there some steps that you can walk through here of this happened and then that led to this and that led to this and here we are?
Absolutely. That's a good point, Ken, because we didn't get here overnight. I mean, let's go back to 2003 when we added the drug benefit to Medicare. And at that time, we had pretty much traditional Medicare, what we call original Medicare. Now, people did take a supplement to cover their deductibles and so forth. They would buy a supplemental insurance plan. That's been part of Medicare forever. But in 2003, and let me, before I talk about the adding the drug benefit in 2003 and how that happened, let me say that what you were pointing out is we don't realize that what happens to us really shouldn't be happening to us sometimes in the healthcare system. But it's natural for a privatized system of government that's turning over governmental programs, let's say it's the military or it's the healthcare system, to a private corporation. It's a natural tendency for those corporations and their lobbyists and their trade associations to add value all the time, to continually increase how much money they can extract out of that system. So what we have in healthcare with the pharmaceuticals, for instance, just one example, is 1,500 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. alone. $350 million that they spend on lobbying, campaign finance, and so forth. So they have learned to make that kind of an investment because they know there's going to be great returns to them, even though those returns are not going to improve the healthcare system at all. It's going to be them extracting as much as they can on the short term. But let's say you go in a nursing home and the food you're served is really substandard, which it typically is, that the care you receive as a patient in the bed is substandard. You're neglected because they don't have enough help and so forth. They could afford to provide you what a human being deserves, but they would rather and are driven to extract that. In other words, reduce your labor costs, reduce the services, give you less for more money, because that's just the way they're going to operate.
Well, if I can interject here to that, the insidious thing about this to me is it's legal. They're not breaking any laws. They're not breaking any rules. They are doing exactly what they are empowered to do by the way the system currently is. So even though you might be a victim of it, you have no recourse because, in a manner of speaking, indirectly, we signed up for this.
That's absolutely correct. Most of what they do, I'll say most of what they do is legal. I'll talk a little bit about the fraud
Okay.
that they commit. But yes, I think that's an excellent point. They are able to influence legislation and legislators to the point where they can complexify the system so much that it's hard. It's like a black box. We've talked about that before. If you make it so complicated that the average citizen can't understand what's really going on, then you have a lot of opportunity to extract money.
Precisely. I'll share an analogy with you real quick that's in the banking industry because it's very much the same thing. Back in the 80s, I had a close friend who was the president of a community bank, told me one night we were out to dinner, and he said, you know, it's easy to make money in a bank. You almost can't not make money running a bank. All you have to do is obey the law. And the reason why is because the banking lobby writes the laws. We write our own laws and then we obey our laws and we make money. That was kind of, at the time, that was a real eye opener to me to hear a banker tell me that. So we're kind of talking about the same thing here, aren't we, in the medical world?
You absolutely are, Ken. And the same thing goes in the healthcare system because the lobbyists write the laws. They're running around Washington. They have the expertise. They're highly paid. Many of them came from a Senate Finance Committee or a Senate Health Committee or some other, maybe a legislator staff member, and they get hired for a lot more money over on K Street. So they have knowledge that you don't have, and that gives them power. And let me say this about the legality of what they do. Medicare has become so complex, so hard to understand. In fact, we get this sent to our homes every year. This is a little book about Medicare.
Yep, I've got mine. Yes.
I challenge anybody to read this book and really understand what they should do in terms of Medicare. But
Sure.
they'll be led to believe, if you read this, I study the language they use in here, you'll be led to believe that Medicare Advantage is the way you really want to go, which is driving people into a privatized form of Medicare.
Right.
And we can talk more about that as we go down the road in the future, how that's working. But when you look at the technical aspects of how bills are submitted to the government by the private providers, I challenge anyone to understand exactly how that works, other than somebody that has a whole lot of experience and expertise with that system. Okay, so they can upcode and overbill. That's where the illegality comes in, because sometimes they knowingly, not sometimes, oftentimes, they knowingly bill for far more than they should back to Medicare. And a huge amount of Medicare dollars are going into that kind of fraud. And when they get caught, which they occasionally do, because there are whistleblowers working in a nursing home, let's say, or they're in a hospital, and they say, hey, you know, you're overbilling, and they're fired. So they go and tell the government that, hey, these people fired me, but I was trying to tell them that they're committing fraud. So that now is fraud because they were told, it was pointed out to them. They get caught so the government investigates, they get caught. And what happens is they get a little, not even a slap, they're just paying the money back and get an agreement with the Department of Justice that they'll behave better. Which, and we're talking sometimes as much as $140–50 million in overbilling. And it's no problem for them to pay it back, because what they've done is use $150 million for a couple, 3, maybe a long time, maybe years. They've had that money that they're going to make money with.
Sure.
They know that. And they also know that there's not going to be much happen to them when they're caught.
Exactly.
But like you say, that's fraud and abuse of the system that goes with the complications and technicalities of how this system is. and it's becoming even more complex and opaque for the average citizen. There's no reason Medicare should be this complicated.
Sure, that makes total sense, Dave. Is it too soon to ask the question, is there any possible path for privatization of healthcare to correct itself and deliver the value that it pretends to deliver to the people who really need it? Or are we looking at a completely different structure that needs to be put in place and the privatization needs to be pulled away?
I think not. I don't think you can privatize a public program and not have it become a monster, whether it's the military or whether it's the rail system. These are not amenable to privatization. As a capitalist, we are looking at competition, we're looking at a market, we're looking at a product that people need and are willing to buy at a price that's competitive. We're looking at disruption. The nursing home system is a good example of how they protect against disruptors. You have to go to the government and get a license to operate. And over 70 years, this system's been in place. There's been a cozy relationship developed between the regulators or the government and the corporations. So now they're no longer really a free market capitalist business because they have a guaranteed revenue at a price that the government's going to set. And they have enough power over government to see to it that that price works for them. They're able to suppress wages because the government is not going to protect the wage earners in that system. So what we have, and I use the analogy to China. China does capitalism, but it's not really capitalism. It's government with their thumb on the corporations. Mm-hmm. In the United States, we have the opposite. We have corporations with their thumb on the government. So it's not pure capitalism. You know, if you're a Tesla corporation, you're really a capitalist corporation because you had to take a risk to disrupt an industry with a new product, an innovation, and you put yourself out there to either fail or survive. You take that risk.
That's an excellent point. And even Tesla, of course, early on received help from the government to get launched and get off get underway, which was a good thing, a positive thing. And the returns from that government investment, you might say, are compounding at this point.
Well, with the government making loans or grants or so forth isn't really the problem. The problem is when the government makes this corporation a part of the system. In other words, they become a guaranteed, they receive this revenue as a guarantee without any risk, without any real competition, because these markets are restricted. Only certain people can come into the healthcare market, whether you're a hospital. The government's going to look at the area where you're operating and say, well, we don't need another hospital. Or we will say to the 2 hospitals in Hays, Kansas, which is a regional center in a rural area of about 15, 20,000 people, you got 2 hospitals, put them into one hospital, merge them together, okay, and you'll have a license to operate. So the government can keep the market restricted. It's not really a free market.
Right. The same thing happened in Salina, right down the road from Hays. 2 hospitals became one, it became a regional center, and the entire area benefited greatly from that combined effort. And so, yeah, that's a positive. That works.
It's a little like feudalism. When the king would say to a certain member of the aristocracy, I'm going to give you this franchise. So you can operate because I'm the king that says you can operate over here, but nobody else will be able to do that. But you're going to have to pay me. Okay. Well, the legislators get paid by the people who they're giving the franchise to operate.
Sure. Now, I want to ask you if there's a corollary to an example that I'm going to give you now. Um, in the technology world, the software world, I'm going to call out Microsoft in particular. Uh, when they were on the bleeding edge of possibly being sued for antitrust and so forth, they in a pure competitive market, the idea is you and I are competing with each other in a market where we each have a product that serves that market. And competition means I'm going to work hard to try to make a better product that has more appeal than you are. That's my focus, is to make a better product. Now, another approach for me is to find ways to compromise and damage you so that I don't have to make a better product, but I can get an advantage over you by impacting your ability to compete with me. And this is precisely what Microsoft was doing early on. They went after competitors and did everything they could to harm the competitor's ability to be in the marketplace instead of making their product better. That's one of the kind of weak links in the capitalist system to me, is that it can foster that kind of approach. Can you offer any kind of a corollary in what's happening in the healthcare industry of that same nature, in terms of how the giants are damaging the efforts of new companies or new upstarts who intend to provide a better service?
Right. We're talking oligopoly here, right? I mean, Microsoft is practically in many areas a monopoly, like over their word processing of Excel spreadsheets and so forth.
Right. Especially at the corporate level. Exactly.
That's right. Or Google with Google doesn't really have a lot of competition. Microsoft's coming in with Bing, and so that becomes sort of a oligopoly, because they'll begin to operate in conjunction with one another, Apple and Microsoft and so forth.
Right.
In the healthcare field, it works the same way, because you have the market's becoming more concentrated with American healthcare, the HCA hospital business, for instance. They're the big kahuna. Now, you can have, and what they're doing is they're gobbling up physician practices. So we're not quite where the software industry is in medical care yet, but we're moving in that direction.
Okay.
In the nursing home industry, it really accelerated about 2000 when private equity came in, and then you had real estate investment trusts. All of a sudden, you had some big players with enough access to capital to begin to dominate that market.
Exactly.
And what that means, Ken, is that they're going to they don't have to price their product at a marginal cost. In other words, a nursing home doesn't have to say, we're going to charge you what it cost us in the next patient in the bed, what that's going to cost us. And then price it as at that plus about 5% profit, right? They're not going to do that. What they're going to do is say, okay, we've got this license. There's only 4 or 5 of us in the city of 40, 50,000 people. Therefore, we don't have a lot of competition. They need us.
Yeah.
And we're not going to price ourselves at a marginal cost, what it would cost us to feed care for this patient. We have 50 patients, and we have 51. This is what the 51st patient's going to cost us to feed, to care for, and so forth, plus 5%. That's the way you would price it. Well, they're not going to do that. They're going to price it at whatever they can squeeze out of the government, which is becoming easier for them to do because they have a huge lobby.
Sure. That's the vehicle right there, is the lobby, isn't it?
That's right. It's government capture. It's buying legislators. It's what we call legal corruption.
Sure. Exactly. Legal corruption. That's a,
And let me say, as a society becomes less and less democratic, it becomes more and more corrupt. That's a law of nature.
right.
So if we were to move, which is possible, to an autocrat as a leader of this country, let's say that the Republicans are able to rig the voting system to the point where they can put a strong man in power and keep him there, which it seems to be their objective these days, then you can bet that there will be no regulation, that there will be stuff handed out, goodies handed out, whether it's healthcare, contracts, whatever,
Yeah.
based on just corrupt means of whoever we want to reward. That's where it works in China right now, pretty much.
Mhm. Mhm.
And to some degree, it works that way in the United States. But because China is a full-blown dictatorship, actually it's a totalitarian country, then they're going to only hand out contracts, or they're only going to make big bank loans to people who are in good standing with the Communist Party.
Right. 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 Well, and this is not a glowing endorsement for democracy, but I'll paraphrase a quote that John Adams made, that all democracies eventually commit suicide.
And we're in the process of doing that. I mean,
Feels,
our democracy is not a full-blown democracy now,
no.
because what we have is a oligarchy in power in this country. They have the money, and money is power,
Uh-huh.
and power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So everybody's heard these terms, and what you and I are trying to do is show people how it's playing out in real life.
Right.
Because
Right.
we are becoming less democratic and more oligarchic or plutocratic.
And that is a ideal foundation for what we're talking about with the healthcare industry in terms of the ways that it's seeking growth and the impact it's having on the population. So I think you and I would both agree that two absolutely vital needs for any society that thrives or has the potential to thrive is to have ways to remain healthy and to become well educated.
That's
It
right.
seems like both of those
Capitalism,
institutions are under threat at this time in some ways.
that's right. Capitalism really can't thrive in a corrupt society. Capitalism thrives best in a democratic society, because we started out saying that system we have is not sustainable because it has become so corrupt and so much and driven by the oligarchs and the plutocrats.
Uh-huh.
So what we're seeing is a maldistribution of wealth in this country, where wealth is piling up. There's a finite amount of wealth in an economic system, and we measure that with what we call the Gini coefficient. How well is this wealth distributed? I mean, we understand that some people will have more than others, and we don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with people getting rich, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But
I'm going to define real wealth, Dave, as the ability of as much of the population as possible to have within their reach the vital services that they need to live a prosperous and safe life. That's wealth. It isn't how
That's
much
right.
money you have in the bank. It's waking up in the morning knowing that I'm going to be okay today because whatever resources I need in order to survive and be safe and be comfortable and be healthy are within my reach.
That's right. And what we're seeing is more and more of the system being rigged against you, whether it's the price of housing, the price of medical care. And the reason that the price of housing is going out of sight and the price of medical care is going out of sight and other things is that you have an increasingly powerful group of people who are accumulating more and more private wealth that they can use to continue to rig the system.
Sure.
And that's why we're saying it's not sustainable, because these people are thinking in the short term. What can I get today? Well, in the long term, I like to use the word peon, and that's a technical term. What they're doing is turning the rest of the 90%, let's say, below the top 10% into a system of peonage, where you can't accumulate wealth. You can't you have to struggle really hard just to get food, clothing, housing, and so forth. And all of the money you make is going to be extracted for the benefit of these folks up here. It's a form of peonage, okay?
Sure.
So let's say you do accumulate some wealth. Let's say you work throughout your life and you retire at 65 with $500,000 that you've got in assets.
Right.
You go into a nursing home, that can go disappear really fast.
Right. Exactly.
Or you have a huge medical bill. Therefore you're having to work all your life for the benefit of this small group of people.
Yes.
And I call that peonage.
Yeah. That's I wouldn't know what else to call it. So we're coming to the end of our time here, Dave. Give us a little bit of a teaser of where we're going from here, what we're going to share in the next session here, if you can.
Well, I think, Kent, we should go into some explanation of how the 1% that are running these so-called corporations, how they're able to funnel this wealth into their own pockets and their own families, and accumulate that total wealth. And their wealth, by the way, we've created more billionaires throughout COVID. In other words, the top 1% did much better in COVID than they did before COVID.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now, what we need to talk about is the system, how that works in everyday language that people can I know, people are smart enough to understand what's going on. You and I can't spend a lot of time studying economics, political economy, and so forth. So what I want to do is talk about how corporate finance works, how personal wealth works, and how they continue to accelerate the domination that they have by increasing the amount of wealth they have versus what the average citizen has. Does that make sense?
It makes good. And that I'll be looking forward to how we can share that information and help people become more aware of the situation that they're really living within, and start being concerned enough to look for other options and other forms of leadership and whatever it takes to try to get this back and going back in the direction it desperately needs to go. So, well, Dave, thanks so much for your time and your insights here. They're always valuable and always helpful, and very much looking forward to the very next session.
Likewise, Ken. Thank you.